It is time for the Cyber Executive Podcast, where we talk with top industry experts about risk, technology, and leadership. I am your host, Marc Ashworth, and today I have the pleasure of having Tom Bakewell here with me today. Tom, thank you very much for being a guest on the latest episode of the Cyber Executive Podcast.
Mark, happy to be here. Thanks for the invite, and look forward to a healthy and robust dialogue.
Great. Well, for everyone here, Tom is a longtime member on multiple boards of directors and has his own book that's out there. If you haven't got it, it's Claiming Your Place at the Boardroom Table. So a fantastic book about boards and how the governance and structure and everything is off of there, and the importance of governance at a board level. So definitely check that out. Being part of, cyber and everything, there's a lot of talk between NACD, which is, produces a annual report and everything off of it. And a lot of others that you see where cyber and technology is, ranked as top 2 or 3, depending on the report of concerns around the board. Kind of what's your take off of that? Are you seeing that on the boards you serve in the discussions with other board directors, out there in the industry? Are you seeing that same level of concern off of there? I'm sure tariffs and those sort of things right now is probably more on topic than maybe cyber, but what's your thoughts on that?
Or kidnappings, or the tragedy of board members being shot. And
Yeah.
just anecdotally, I've got a good friend who's the chairman of that board in the healthcare industry. So
Wow.
It's a very real world out there. You're going right to the heart of the matter. You're hitting a hardball question right out of the box. Being easy on me, Mark. Thanks for the nice intro. Thanks for the plug on the book. I'm going to diverge just for a second.
Sure.
And talk about the National Association of Corporate Directors is the premier governance organization. I've had the privilege of working with them for many years, being a member for 30 plus years. And they, back in the earliest days I was with them, they talked about what are their criteria for a good board member. And one of you can just tick off 4 or 5 things, what makes a great board member. You want integrity and accountability, you want informed judgment, you want mature confidence, you want high performance standards in everything you do. And then one of the debatable questions for many years is, must you be a financial expert to be on a board? And that question was debated 50 years ago, 40 years ago. It's still debated today. And my answer is maybe. It depends on the nature of your work. You work in the bank, you're in the banking industry. I suspect I pretty well want every board member coming around the table at least to have a minimum financial literacy. So I just use that as a metaphor to answer your good question. What level is the intensity of interest in cyber and in digital transformation? It's extremely high. And should it always be the highest one? The world we live in today,
Mm-hmm.
You never know when ESG is the hot item. You never know when COVID shows up. You never know what you're going to do next. So it's always going to be in the top handful of events. And I'll give you one anecdotal comment. So I attended a board meeting the other day, and it's a pretty sleepy industry, but it's an industry that involves some really high-tech, big money stuff, trading futures and things. And so you can bet everybody's very concerned about security, et cetera. And just at the end of the meeting, they had somebody come in to talk about, AI and tech. And it's like everybody in the room woke up, it went zoom, and it was like, we need a half a day session on this. We don't need 30 minutes on this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's way up there. You get to follow-on questions, well, what level of knowledge of individuals do we need in the boardroom, and how do you get to it? I know that'll be another one of your questions, no doubt. It's very important. So I'm going to give you a good lawyer answer. I have that in my background. It depends, and a little bit of both. So I'm a big believer that it's arrived. It's nothing new you've been dealing with for your entire career. I could pick up a book here that I've got from 2020. You were nice to plug my book. Here was Disruption in the Boardroom by a friend of mine. She's a lawyer, got a great tech background, Jennifer Wolfe, Disruption in the Bedroom, Boardroom. This was written in 2020, so, and before that, she did a book on blockchain in the boardroom, so,
Mhm.
we're talking about that these days. So there's a long answer to a short question.
Yeah, and definitely there's a lot of debate around that, and there's just so much of a driving factor. I mean, I think next to some sort of natural disaster, me and a lot of my peers, we talk about, really cyber is probably the one event that you could wake up in the next day and just your business could be gone, and
Yeah.
or severely impacted. So it is a valid risk that organizations need to take at heart. And it's short of a tornado that hits or something along that line, that could wipe out a facility, that cyber is your next biggest threat, probably, and probably more likely than a thunderstorm coming through. So
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, with that, NACD had a recent report around technology as maybe being its own part of its own structure within a board environment, and maybe its own committee in there versus maybe having it in the audit committee. Is that something that you're seeing happening a little bit more, or is that more for some of the larger organizations, or is it just kind of a nice concept that NACD is proposing?
No, it's really happening, and I will. I spent the vast majority of my career as a consultant, so I give you a good consultant answer. Well, there's three solutions, or there's three answers, and here we go. But let me mention the details of that report just for your folks out there that may
Mhm.
not have gotten it. The NACD has done not every year, but off and on over the years. They do what they call blue ribbon commission reports. And they did in 2024 a blue ribbon commission report on technology, recommendations of the 2024 NACD Blue Ribbon Commission. So if you haven't gotten that, get your hands on that. That's definitely worth having. I don't know if you link in the show notes or anything here, the title of that, but I might make sure you get that. So your question is how do you manage through if you're sitting at the board level and you have responsibility for oversight? How do you manage through bringing technology into your boardroom to make sure it's being covered? And what I would say, back to my three options, you start with the basics. So um, you look at the standing committees that you already have, and inevitably, if you have an organization of any size and on a required basis, if you're a public company, you're required to have three committees. You're required to have an audit committee. You're required to have a nominating and governance committee, and in a separate committee you usually get is a compensation and an HR committee. So traditionally, it falls in the audit committee to have your tech responsibility. But what I would do is, were I in your shoes or anybody looking at it from your side of the table, I would get the charters for those three committees, and then I would say, what are we looking for? What are we looking for in each of these committees in terms of how we address, So the nom and gov, you're usually talking about board members you being elected, So what requirements would we want to have of our board members coming in, or will we need a specific person or persons with those skill sets? A very vital second level of that is, again, the comp and what people call the talent area. I heard a talk the other day by a fellow who's the founder and the CEO of Tata Consulting Agency, a pretty large worldwide agency, and he said, "Yeah, you got the tech side, but the people side, the culture, and the people side is just as important in this world." So the first cut is you look at the standing committees you've got. And then you get into the question that I think you're really asking: do you create a separate committee that's very tech focused or not? And well, when you spin off of that, you either do that, or what are your two options? The other two options are you have a tech subcommittee, and then the third option is you have a tech advisory committee. So any of those models can work. It's I'm a you choose kind of guy. You look at what the options are. You look at the talent you have. You look at the resources you have to throw at it, and you see what works best for you. So those are kind of the approach. But back to your initial comment and question, people are absolutely much more heavily focused on this area. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Interesting. So, you kind of mentioned around qualifications of,
Yes.
board members and everything. And I know there are NACD does this and a few other groups does this around a cybersecurity certification type deal, and it's usually a couple days and that sort of things. Do you think that's sufficient for a board member? I mean, that's kind of like me going out and taking a 2-day class and now trying to say that I'm a CPA or a lawyer, from my mind,
Yeah.
and versus having someone that's been in tech or in cyber for decades, and then trying to add that, or someone that's been in operations maybe or something along that line for a long time, and then but trying to get a couple days certification for that. Do you think that's sufficient, or is that just enough to kind of provide some base knowledge to be able to ask some questions to others that might be advising the board at that point?
Yeah, again, I'm going to make it industry specific. To me, it would be board specific to look at that very question, but I definitely think the level needs to be kicked up. You go through these phases, so my
Mm-hmm.
basic question, do you need people that are financially literate or not? Well, not all of them, but if I'm on a bank board, I want most of them to be financially literate.
Sure.
If I'm in an industry that's heavy tech oriented, or very high risk oriented, like financial services, and all the money can disappear out of my account tomorrow. Yeah, I want some people at a very very high level. Now, doubling back to this approach you can take. So I've chaired audit committees over the years, and one of the things that I've emphasized in recent years is when we do, so just using the example of a bank again, what you know a lot about, there can be 15 to 20 different types of audits that you need to do,
Mm-hmm.
specific audits in banks with different portfolios, different type of assets, etc. Well, when it comes audit time, I might have a terrific in-house audit team, but I'm going to move more and more and more towards having outside specialists come in to perform a large number of those audits on a regular basis. So you're getting new thinking, you're getting new eyes on it, etc. Coming back to your core question, I'm a big believer that we should have more specific knowledge of tech in the boardroom.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you get that? Where do you get that? Is that age oriented, etc.? It's just important that you think about it and you get it. Another example would be, you've seen this trend in the last decade as well. Uh, you never used to see an HR talent being put into, someone who's a full-time HR professional or a talent executive. It was rare for them to be in boardrooms. You're seeing them join boardrooms more and more and more. But it's been a slow build, slow
Mm-hmm.
burn, and that's what I see for tech as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've heard a lot of that too around the HR, the CHRO or whatever being on the board
Right,
to advise, just like the CFO or
right,
chief legal counsel or whoever would be in
right.
there. So yeah,
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. So
yeah,
maybe let's step back a little bit here for a second, and for some of our listeners that may not know too much about boards, but
yes,
board is around the governance of the organization.
yes.
It's what is it? What's the saying? Like ears in, nose out, or something along that line.
Nose in, fingers out
There we
is
go. There we go.
historic. Nose
I knew I was
in,
butchering that.
fingers
So,
out. You're close. That's all right.
but basically, you're there to provide governance and not
Yes.
being part of the
Yeah.
operational day to day tactical type stuff.
Right.
So, can you maybe kind of talk a little bit, just real briefly, about a board? And you mentioned the different committees and stuff, but
Mhm.
maybe kind of like the thought process around the
Sure.
governance and maybe even strategy along with that.
Yeah. So anyway, when you kick off and think about a board, the first place I always start with is, okay, going to have a board, and there's two distinctions. There's oversight and there's hands-on management. Now it's very gray area in between, but the oversight and the board, as a rule, oversees the managers. They pick the managers, the key managers, and they're supposed to keep an eye on everything that's being done. Is it meeting the strategy? Is it meeting, the budget, et cetera? And they run an ethical business, et cetera. The second question I always ask when I look at a board is how engaged should that board be? Now think of a bell-shaped curve, okay? And I kind of have about 5 points along a bell-shaped curve. On the one hand, you have the old-fashioned boards where they show up, they have a cocktail or they have a cup of coffee, and they pass much judgment on, okay, this looks fine, everything's good. Then you go all the way to the other extreme where sometimes you can have operating boards. Very early in my career, I was on board of a college that went through a financial crisis, and I happened to be the chairman of the finance committee. It was like, we can't meet payroll this week. Those kinds of things really happen. And just anecdotally, that industry is pretty much in the soup again right now. And we had a situation going on where I was out there every Saturday morning for 4 or 5 hours a week for a year. While we worked through that crisis. I was an actively engaged, hands-on board member who was almost acting like management. And I look at that bell-shaped curve, and I kind of look like right in the middle, midpoint's about the good point to have of active level of engagement. You need to be meeting regularly, overseeing things, but not putting your hands or fingers into the day-to-day management. If you reach that point, it's time for a change in leadership.
Mm.
So those are the key things I would say about overall governance, and then back to the thing we touched on earlier. The real magic about good boards are getting an effective team in the boardroom that can work together with management and making sure that you pick really, really good board members. And that takes some time and thought, and it takes a while. You can go through all kinds of important steps and work to bring in good board members that look like it's going to work. And if it's not a goodness of fit, then it's time to move on. Goodness of fit's very important. So a lot of heavy duty lifting there in terms of bringing boards together and getting them to work right.
Mm. Yeah, and boards could be on both nonprofit, family-owned, as well
Yes.
as obviously any publicly traded is required to have that.
Yeah.
So, is there have you seen like major differences between those type from your experience?
Yeah. And that's a great question. So I'm going to go back to ground level again, but I'd almost say a primer on governance. Uh, you know, what are my duties if I'm a board member, and what is governance? I mean, it just fundamentals on governance. This is very vague. It's very amorphous. It's very touchy feely. But governance is a relationship. Governance is a conversation. Governance is a journey. You really got to spend a lot of deep dive time into it, and it takes you a while to kind of really get the feel for it and understand it. When I wrote my book, I came up with my own definition of governance, and what I say is governance is experiential and reality based. And what I mean by that is you may have a nice theory and an idea about governance. I'm joining the college board, aren't I important? And I'm going to go to meetings 4 times a year and listen to people talk. And the first weekend I get a phone call that says, well, we can't meet payroll this week. So suddenly the world got real. And that college came desperately close to closing, several within one vote and one person voting to keep it open versus closing it. So that's a first cut on governance. Any board member, their primary duty, they have 2 duties: duty of care and duty of loyalty. They have to be careful about what they do. They have to show up. If they're not knowledgeable about technology and it's the soup of the day, it's the hot item of the day, then they got to figure out a way to attend to that. And the duty of loyalty. I have to look out for the board. I don't need to look out for my best interest.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes that can be a little questionable. Outside looking in, you wonder if a board member really is independent, or they're not just looking at their own situation, because board positions sound very exalted. You've been on some boards yourself over the years, but it's hard work, it's heavy lifting, and you do have a loyalty to the organization, not to the CEO, not to an individual, not to a best friend.
Yeah, definitely. It's you're there for the organization and the success of that organization, and not for an individual that might be in the management staff. That's for sure. So
No question about that.
yeah. So There are, I think, some essential elements for a high performance board. Is there, can you kind of go through those top ones? I know you mentioned them in your book, but I don't want to give them
Sure.
away, so I'll let
Oh,
you
that's
talk
okay.
about them.
Well, I'll be shameless. Go ahead and just spend a minute plugging the book and then touch on that. And if it's considered a paid advertisement, I'll just say, oh, darn. But so my book is kind of funny. I was asked to write a book about effective governance across the board. And, it's a pretty, very large topic. And it's like, tell me everything you know about technology in 200 pages.
Right.
It's not an easy task. Well, we used a big city publisher, McGraw-Hill, which was fine, great people. And they said, well, we want to put a chapter in there on joining boards too, because most people do want to know about getting on boards. It's a good topic. So anyway, the title of the book's claiming your place on the boardroom table. Well, to me, that's kind of a throwaway chapter. What the book's really about is effective governance. So if you're looking to your question, if you're looking to have effective governance, I'm going to read off a list here. There's kind of 8 things you really need to have magical governance. And the very first thing you need, and if you don't have this, don't even bother. You need a CEO committed to great governance. Second thing you got to have is effective board chair leadership. And sometimes that can be very tricky because you get into this great debate, particularly in the public company space. Should the chairman of the board be the CEO or not? So you see situations where you have chair of the board as the CEO, or sometimes you have an independent board member. Sometimes you also get a situation where they try and split the baby and you have what's called a lead director. So you'll have the big public company CEO who has both the title of chairman and CEO, but then there's an independent lead director who's supposed to interact with the CEO chair and lead the meetings, direct the meetings. So you get that effective chair leadership. You want capable board members, dedicated board members. People talk about all these, they need to have tech skills, they need to have this, they need to have that. And the first things I ask about are a cute little expression I use. What are the ables? Are they capable? Are they available? Are they dependable? Are they reasonable? Are they going to show up, et cetera?
Mm-hmm.
You kind of have to be able to show up to get the job done. You want a productive board culture, and that's kind of the magic. And it's kind of like, how do you get a group of people to work together? And it's basically group dynamics. We've all studied in psychology and college over the years and all. How do you get an effective group? Do they like each other? Do they get along? Do they interact well with management, et cetera? Then you get what I call effective oversight, and that's the magic, of both CEO and organizational performance. And that gets into real things like really serious performance reviews, not just for the CEO, but throughout the organization. And then the one that people get a little squishy about, but the next one is actual evaluations, board evaluations, CEO evaluations. And I personally believe, and I'm very, very ticky about this, I believe evaluations should go both ways. And what I mean by that is I'm sure that you have a boss somewhere in the
Mm-hmm.
world, and that boss evaluates you on a pretty regular basis. Well, I'm a big believer as an oversight governance person that those evaluations should work both ways at some point in time to know that, and up to and including the board should be evaluated in terms of their performance and are they doing their job. So that's important. And then the last item I'd tick off is just leadership and succession planning. Really spending a lot of time on. Mark, I love you. You do great work. But if you're gone tomorrow, maybe you won the lottery. Let's make it a pleasant experience. You won the lottery, and it was a big one. And you aren't coming into work tomorrow. Who's going to pick up the pieces? So yeah.
Sure.
So that's kind of top line. What I think, the short list of what it takes for a higher performing board. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's so many synergies there on what you just mentioned, not only at the board level but the executive level, as well
Yeah.
as even on your teams. I mean,
Yeah.
there's really not much difference there. It's all
Yeah.
that same concepts that needs to be there and built. It's just at different levels in the organization. So
Yeah, and let me throw one other term out there, expression, another cute one like noses in, figures out. This is one I kind of came up with myself, but in terms of boards being successful and working, it's and there's a tendency, especially in a space like yours,
Mhm.
it's not about rules and regulations. It's about how people work together.
Right.
I mean, you can talk all the Sarbanes-Oxley you want. You can talk, all the COSO audit standards you want. You can talk about all the data requirements. It's not about rules and regulations. It's about how people work together.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's the magic. That's what really makes it work.
Yeah. So I'm sure there's people listening here that would like to know, hey, how do I get on a board?
Yep.
What's the step? Should I, start with advisory boards? Should I, look at VCs or, get certifications? What
Sure.
sort of things? What's your advice if you want to get in there?
Yep.
And probably if you're not a CEO, obviously, if you're a
Yeah.
CEO, it makes it a lot easier to get in there. But
Hey, let's just say you're a CTO,
yeah.
and it does make it easier. You go through cycles. There was the day that everybody wanted the big CEO, but not so much anymore. Because they're very, very busy people, and most boards today that I know want really working board members. And people who will put the time and energy in. And oftentimes CEOs don't have that. So, another cute expression: you fish where the fish are. So first of all, you got to pay your dues. You got to go out, work hard, pay your dues. And that includes the best place where most everybody, I don't know a single board member that didn't start at the same place, and that was charities. Charities, not for profits, churches. My first board experience was a church board. My second board experience was doing free charity work for a not for profit, which in fact was a public TV station, which in fact, even though I was the youngest lawyer in the firm, and when they wanted some free work, it kind of bounced all the way down to the bottom to me, and then somehow I magically did some really good work, and I got invited to sit on the board of, and public TV stations are pretty prominent places, and there was some chagrin on the senior partners' faces when I got invited on this fairly prestigious board at a pretty young age, and so well these things happen,
Mm-hmm.
and it's only because I did some really good work, and I put a lot of time into it.
Mm-hmm.
So and again, so my next board was a college board, a university board, and then it was a hospital board. So you build but it's about relationships. It's all about
Yeah.
relationships. Again, you fish where the fish are. You say, who do I know who's on a board member? And then the other thing is you do you do the unexpected. I had a board that I was actually angling on forever. And sometimes that's one of the compelling questions in the world of governance. Can you ask to be on a board? Well, in theory, not really, but well, it turns out this guy that I was in this small group with, who was the most quiet person I've ever known in my life, he was the person that could put me right in the door of a board. And sure enough, it happened when I finally obliquely asked it. I didn't go straight at him and said, "Hey, this is what I want. This is what I need." But I figured out what his interests were. I got to know him. I got to know his business. I got to know, again, I spent a little time working with him, and boom, then it happened.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hey, you know what? I know you got a beloved sister who was a faculty member at this place, and I'm a graduate of that place, and I'd really be interested in maybe giving some money and some time and interest. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
And sure, that's how it happens. So those are the key steps. Then of course, be shameless. There's this book out there called "Claiming Your Place on the Boardroom Table." And there's a lot of good resources. I tell you what, just go to the websites for the big search firms. They've all got little primers on how to get onto a board. And special offer here today if you want to make it available for your readers, for your listeners. Excuse me. I'm authorized in any kind of setting like this to give the first chapter of my book.
Okay.
So again, if you make that available,
Yeah.
happy to let you put that up on your site.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Great.
Gotcha. And that chapter is about getting on boards. Yeah.
Very nice. Well, I appreciate that. Well, Tom, I appreciate all the insights here and everything today. And look forward to more conversations as always. I know we talk regularly and everything, enough to keep each other updated. So, but I really appreciate you being out here on the podcast and giving your insights and talking about cyber and the board and how to get on one. So thank you very much for being here.
Governance is a journey. Happy to join you along the way, and I look forward to the next exciting news about what your next big board's going to be. Marc, thanks very much. Great to be with you, and off we go. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye.
And for everyone else, please continue, listening to the podcast. Click follow and subscribe. And until next week, thank you very much.